Hey, y'all. Welcome to the talk on adaptation.
Focus Fox.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathryn Fantauzzi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apollo Neuroscience. And I'm here with Dr. David Rabin, MD, PhD, who is my co-founder, and lucky for me, also my better half.
A little closer.
You want me to talk even closer to the mic? Okay, it sounds very loud to me, but I'll try. I'm Kathryn. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apollo Neuroscience, and I'm here with Dr. David Rabin, MD, PhD, a psychiatrist and neuroscientist who's been studying chronic stress and its effects on our body and how we adapt and are more resilient to change for the last about 20 years. And so before we get going, I wanted to really just level set as to what we're talking about. What is resilience? Resilience is really the ability to bounce back. Why do some people are able to take a hit and some people crack under the pressure? And what do we know from advances in neuroscience, psychedelics, and what's coming down the pike with AI to make us more resilient so we can adapt to our ever-changing world? But before we get going, I wanted to have us all take a moment to tap into our own natural ability to be more resilient and have everybody take a stand up so that Dave can walk us through a quick little resilience exercise.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this beautiful boat cruise. It's so exciting to see you all. It's a gorgeous day. Can we start out by just giving a big round of applause to the Summit crew for throwing this great party? Woo! All right. So we've all been doing a lot of dancing and hanging out and getting to know each other and eye gazing, etc. And I think it's good to take a moment to just ground ourselves, present, where we're at right now. So we're just going to do a few deep breaths. For any of you who have not learned deep breathing, this is going to be the simplest, easiest breathing technique you will ever learn. It's called filling your lungs. You can breathe through your nose or mouth, it doesn't matter. And just gently breathe in. You can close your eyes if you like for 5 seconds. Just fill your lungs as full as they can. And then just exhale. We're going to take another one. Just inhale, your nose or mouth. Just try to take in a little bit more air than last time. Just a little tiny bit. Fill those lungs a little bit more full. And then exhale. Try to make each breath just a teensy bit longer. Each inhale, just a little bit more emptying of those lungs. One more in. Filling those lungs as full as you can. And exhale. We'll do 3 more of those at your own pace. Just filling those lungs. And if you don't have anybody right next to you, you can raise your arms as you breathe. Fills your lungs even more. Last one. All right. When you're ready, have a seat. Do a little stretch if you like.
So Dave, you've been studying the nervous system, really what is a core function of what makes us resilient or not. So why did we just do the breathing exercise?
So I don't know how many of you notice anything change in your bodies or your head when you did that exercise. The most common thing that we notice is as we start to slow our breath, and really just by simply directing your attention to your breath, because your breath is always just kind of doing its thing in the background, right? That's kind of what we learned growing up, is our breath is automatic. It's just going to do its thing. And what we aren't really taught, or at least most of us weren't taught, I know I wasn't taught it, is that when we direct our attention to our breath, we notice that we find ourselves sometimes more in our bodies, a little more present in our bodies, what we call grounded, right? And we start to notice our thoughts start to slow down a little bit. Sometimes we can even notice our heart rate slowing down, we can notice feeling less stressed, and a whole lot more. which is really interesting because breathing is like the most fundamental thing that we all do, and yet most of us don't do it right because we just weren't taught. Breathing is also one of the most powerful tools at accelerating our ability to adapt to stress and be resilient. And so if resilience is our ability to bounce back from stress, then what it is really is balance, right? And so if we think about health, not just from a Western perspective of go to your doctor, get a prescription, or go to the hospital and get surgery, but from the Eastern and tribal perspectives as well, looking at, and I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, by the way, and I approach this from originally a Western perspective, but the Eastern and tribal stuff has always fascinated me because it's tens, thousands of years old, and it has an incredible lineage of preventative care and actually preventing people from getting sick, preventing our balance from being thrown off. So when we breathe, we actually restore that balance instantly, just by directing our attention to our breath, just by feeling and noticing the feeling of the air coming into our nose, mouth, and lungs. And you can keep doing this while I'm talking if you like. And just notice the feeling. Something that we often don't notice. And that almost immediately restores balance in our bodies, which optimizes our resilience. How do we know this? Because there have been fields of study called biofeedback, cardiovascular physiology, many others that have studied this for the last 50 years or so and actually mapped out what happens to the body when we enter these states. And if you look at the Eastern and tribal techniques and practices, they talk about health. The word health has a lot of different words in different languages. And what it really means, especially if you go back to the ancient Sanskrits, savatya, has a lot to do with balance and breath. And so breath is really at the core of all of resilience and everything we do. And it's the way that we can almost instantly restore control or agency, our ability to feel like we can actually be manifesting agents in our own lives at any moment. So that's why we start with breath, because breath is literally our best tool that we can use in any moment to access ourselves and to start to unlock our full potential to be resilient and to restore balance, which means when stress comes, we're able to bounce back like that. And the more we practice breathing when we're not stressed out, the better we get at not being stressed out, which is why it's so important to do it as often as you can think about it.
So you're talking a lot about balance. And I just want to I have a feeling that I've got a very well-informed audience, but I just want to check in. How many of you guys know about the fight or flight response? Okay, everybody. Okay. And so essentially what we're talking about here is why do some people bounce back and other people don't? Why does burnout happen and why are some people so resilient? And really the basis of it is safety. In your nervous system, you have two branches. You have your fight or flight response, which everybody knows, super important, right? If a bear showed up or the alarm went off, we'd want to get the hell out of here and we'd want to survive. But we need to have enough recovery time that fight or flight response can operate properly. If we're constantly surveying the scene for potential threat, we never get a chance for our bodies to recover, which makes it much more likely for us to burn out or have some sort of challenge, mood challenge, irritability, poor sleep, bad sex, whatever it comes down to. If you don't feel safe, then you really can't have all the other thriving elements, right? You're just in survival mode. And so one of the tools that we have to balance our nervous system is in our breath, because when we take the time to deep breathe, we give our bodies the moment to recognize that we are in fact safe and that there's a moment to recover. And so these practices that many of us are doing, mindfulness practices, who does breath work here? Okay. Who does a meditation practice? Okay. Does everybody getting good sleep? This trip not included. Okay. So you're doing the basics, and you guys know about the basics. The basics are to help encourage recovery in your nervous system. And there's a lot more coming down the pike. So, Dave, in terms of, a lot of people have been asking me, because how many of you guys have like an Oura Ring or a Whoop or one of these gadgets? Okay, more than the rest of the population. It's like 30% of the US right now. But I think one of the major questions that I've been getting asked is, okay, I know that I want to be resilient, I want to get great sleep, I want to be the best. That's why we're here, right? All the summiters, that's why we're here. So what is it that people should be measuring? Because the number one question I'm getting is, what should my HRV be? And I'm measuring it. What should I do about it? And then how do I make it better? What should it be and how do I make it better?
So raise your hand if you know what HRV is, heart rate variability. Awesome. All right, that's going to make this a lot easier. So for those who don't know, heart rate variability is the rate of change of our heartbeat over time. So over the last, because of the field of biofeedback and because of recent research over the last 25 years or so, this has now become, and thanks mostly actually due to elite athletics research and military research, HRV has become the best measure of resilience in the body and overall health and longevity, which is really interesting. So it's a sign of it's a metric for how good we are at adapting to stress, to bouncing back, and to maintaining long-term health and balance. So what that actually means is that if you have a high HRV and you've been training your body, you've been training yourself to be resilient, you're doing all the good stuff, you're getting lots of good sleep being the number one thing that makes your HRV high, breath being number 2, soothing touch being number 3, music and movement number 4 and 5, and then good nutrition is number 6, right? So starting with high HRV, assuming we're all trained, and everybody's HRV is their own personal heart rate variability. We all have our own personal baseline. So the trick is figure out what your baseline is if you care about tracking your metrics, and then try to do things that improve it. If you have a high HRV, what that means is that as soon as stress comes, we might have actually anticipated it already because we're tuned into the moment, we're present, we picked up on the signs. We've already done some things to prepare. And then when stress comes or threat comes, we adapt to it very, very quickly. We get ourselves out of danger. We come up with a really awesome solution for that thing that we feel good about. And then we move on to the next thing and we get back to a safe environment. In those stressed out states, when you have high heart rate variability and our bodies are really healthy and optimized and we're resilient, as soon as stress comes, our heart rate goes up very quickly and our blood pressure goes up quickly and our breath rate goes up quickly in the body to help our minds overcome this current situation. And then when the threat's gone and the stress is gone, we go back to safety, right? That's the goal, get from threat to safety, just like all the other animals. So once we get back to safety, we want our heart rate to come down quickly. We want our blood pressure to come down quickly. We want our respiratory rate to come down quickly. We want to stop sweating from our palms, right? We want to feel safe. And ultimately, that is the goal of all training, physical training, mental training, emotional training, even spiritual training, which are all connected because the mind and the body and the spirit are really all part of one organism or one. This is like one of the greatest fallacies of modern medicine.
No matter what Descartes said, the mind and the body are in fact not separate. I think that's actually kind of a funny story.
Oh yeah, I don't know how many of you know about René Descartes, but he was one of the most famous philosophers of science of the 19th century, but his philosophies extend to now. And he developed the idea that mind, body were separate and completely disconnected by basically sitting naked in a closet by candlelight for like 2 weeks when he was really, really depressed. And everybody believed him for some reason. Now we say, you need therapy, bro. But everybody believed him, including the entire medical community. And this is before germ theory, and this is in the very early days of medicine. It was like 1860s, I think. And this propagated this misinformation or misinterpretation that the mind and the body are completely separate, which actually creates a lot of problems for us in health because when you're physically ill and you don't treat it, you get mentally ill. And if you're mentally ill and you don't treat it, you get physically ill. So they're pretty much completely connected. So as we start to look at HRV is like the body's sign that it's telling us that we are healthy and fit when it's high. When it's low, if anybody tracks this on like Oura Ring or Apple Watch, you will see your HRV might be lower for the week, lower than it usually is, or lower for the month. And that means that when stress comes, we're going to be slower to adapt. Our heart rate's not going to go up as quickly. And that when we go back to safety, our heart rate's going to stay high. We're going to stay amped. And so we're not going to be able to recover quickly. And effectively, our ability to transition from one situation to another gets way worse. And this increases our risk of illness, mental and physical, having a low heart rate variability. It increases our rate of injury if you're an athlete. It decreases your ability to perform physically at a consistent level to the point where military and elite athletics Like our most elite military and most elite athletes will not be sent on a mission and will not be allowed to start if they have low HRV for their personal baseline. So that's how important this metric is. And we can train it in lots of different ways, which is really cool. And I think this is now coming out into Western medicine, but Eastern and tribal techniques have been teaching us practices to boost HRV for, again, thousands of years. So it's really the unification of these different disciplines and the appreciation of what Eastern and tribal practices bring to preventative care kind of merged with what all this great knowledge and technology that we've brought from Western medicine that really is putting this really beautiful whole picture together about the future of health.
So,
and psychedelics, of course.
And we're going to get there. We're going to get to the psychedelics part. But I think one of the interesting things you talk about is this core of safety in the body, right? If you have low HRV, it's because your body, it's just a metric. And it's just a metric to say, hey, you're a little run down. Maybe you're not sleeping well enough. Maybe you should chill out on the red wine before dinner. Maybe you should exercise a little bit more. Maybe you should meditate a little bit more. But it's just an indicator that says, when the bear shows up, you're not going to run away as fast. When something really bad happens, when a real threat happens, you're not there, you're not prepared. And the thing that makes humans so amazing is our ability to adapt, right? And the speed of change that has happened in the way that we live our lives is unprecedented. Technological change is unreal. If you think about it, the amount of information that we pick up in our phones in the first 30 minutes of being awake is more information that somebody got in an entire week in the 1950s. So if you think about what you're overloading yourself with, I think it's really interesting and good that people are reconnecting to somatic practice of ancient practice, like breath work and meditation and mindfulness. But there's also some new things coming down the pike in terms of technological stuff that we can use. Sorry. There's technological change coming down the pike that's going to help us adapt more quickly and actually help us keep up with the change in the environment that's been around us. So we're both deeply connected to this space, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit, give us a highlight about the stuff coming down the pike.
So this is actually a really good segue to wearables and psychedelics, because psychedelic medicine is really fascinating because we've never really understood exactly how it works from a Western perspective. But when and I'm also a ketamine trained therapist. I do ketamine therapy and train other clinicians to do ketamine therapy. And I'm also trained by MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, to do MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. And these techniques are really fascinating because they're literally paradigm shifting for the field of psychiatry. And when I say paradigm shifting, what I mean is that we've never, in the history of our entire field of psychiatry, had treatments that work this well to actually potentially allow us to use the cure word for mental illness, which is pretty fucking unreal. Like, we have never been able to use the cure word for mental illness. That's like, imagine if you got an infection and you lived before antibiotics were invented, and your infection was a terminal illness. Like, there was a good chance you're going to lose a limb or you're going to die from that. And now we have the potential with the medicines that are available, like ketamine, which is legal in every state and almost every country worldwide, to actually deliver the potential for a cure for mental illness to people, which has never existed before. And the reason why they work is actually not that complicated. When we think about them all as separate medicines, it seems really complicated because they all have different molecular structures, and ketamine seems so different than MDMA, it seems so different than psilocybin and LSD, and they're all so different. But when you actually look at what they're doing in the therapy, whether you're with a shaman in the jungle or whether you're with somebody like me in an office, we are building a team with you. We are your team. We are your treatment team. We are not the source of your healing. And by the way, if you're seeing anybody as a therapist who tells you that the source of your healing and your medicine, go find somebody else. That is not a safe person to do medicine work with. We are not the source of your healing. The healing comes from within you. That's what Hippocrates said. That's what Maimonides said. That's what Buddha said. It's what's been always said. Healing comes from within the person who seeks to be healed.
That's what Captain Planet said. The power is yours.
But that can only be unlocked when we feel safe. Okay? This is absolutely critical. We were all born with the ability to heal ourselves from lots of different shit. But we can only unlock that ability when we feel safe enough to heal. This is absolutely critical to understand. Because the reason why psychedelics work, whether you're using ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin in the therapeutic setting, ayahuasca, the reason why they work is because the individual who wants to be healed feels safe enough to lean into that experience and face stuff that's happened to them that they normally don't feel safe enough to go back to. And that stuff that's happened to us, which all of us have had stuff that's happened to us, it's all different. Not all of us would necessarily call it like a big T trauma, but it doesn't matter. The point is we've all had stuff that's happened to us over our lives that's hard. And stuff that's happened to our families that's actually been passed down, which is even more interesting. And it's the safety that allows us to go back and feel those memories again and to effectively reinterpret how we see ourselves based on the trauma or based on the challenging events that we were facing. And this is how all psychedelic psychotherapy works. Literally all of it. The medicine amplifies the team safety that we build with our patients in the office or that you build with your shaman in the jungle. The medicine amplifies that safety molecularly. MDMA is the best example. If anybody's ever done MDMA, you know how safe and loving and calm and at peace with yourself you feel at a peak dose of MDMA. In the right setting, of course. But it's a very, very powerful experience. And what most people notice when they have that experience is that experience is not foreign to them. It might be new or like recent or something that they haven't felt or don't remember feeling. But a lot of people remember that feeling of safety from when they were a kid. And so what ends up happening when we feel that safe is literally our blood vessels in our body are regulated by our nervous system and they dilate. And they allow blood to go back to the parts of our bodies that are allowed to get resources when we're safe. So that's like our reproductive system, our digestive system, our immune system, our sleep and recovery system, and all the good stuff that makes our lives rich, that allows us to reproduce. Because you don't want to think about reproducing or digesting your food when you're running from a bear or a lion in the jungle, right? That would be a certain demise. So the safety response is critical. And when we're under threat, we're literally taking all of our resources away from our reproductive system, our digestive system, our immune system, our sleep and recovery system, and they're getting sent to the skeletal muscles, the heart, the lungs, the motor cortex of the brain, and the fear center of the brain. And there's only so many resources to go around. So when we're thinking about resilience, the modern take on resilience that is coming out of this hybridized understanding of Western, Eastern, and tribal medicine is that restoring balance is literally restoring balance to our nervous systems, which allows us to redirect resources back to the organ systems that need it. And the organ systems that need it are the organ systems that make our lives good. And when we're under threat all the time, when we have chronic stress, too much phone, too many screens, too much everything, what ends up happening is we lose resources, but all of those organ systems, like the reproductive system and the digestive system, are still expected to function at their normal level. We're still like, digest my food. Let me make love to my partner, right? Let me be compassionate with my children. And if you don't feel safe, then there's no resources going to those organ systems. So why would you expect a car to run with no gas, right? So that what happens is then the systems start to dysfunction because they're acting all the time. They're doing their thing. You're still asking them to work, but they don't have any resources. And they don't have, most importantly, blood to take away the waste that they create when they don't have enough resources. And then you get an accumulation of waste, and that's how we get organ system failure, dysfunction, and disease. That is basically the resilience explanation of how we get sick. And so by doing the kind of practices like we talk about, which again, I'm gonna lay it out as six core practices. So six. First one is breath. Intentional breathing, directing your attention. These are all intentional practices because it's putting your attention on what you want to do that actually manifests the outcome. Intentional breathing, intentional touch, intentional listening. First, touch is applied to us, or when we apply it to somebody else consensually. Intentional listening, which is just tuning in and listening to something, anything, song, or creating music. And intentional movement, right? These things are things we have control over in any moment, that we can do in any moment that restore balance to the body and remind us that we're in control of our feelings and our situation in any moment. And the last two are sleep and nutrition. So by balancing these 6 things and just keeping them in our minds, we can literally maintain our resilience. And when you, over time, and when you see, if you do track your HRV, which you don't have to do, I personally don't track my HRV, but a lot of people do. And if you like tracking, that's great. And it can help. But when you watch your HRV and you do these practices, you'll see it go way, way up over time. And that is a really good sign. Doesn't really matter what you're starting at, but it matters that it trends up over time.
So the power is ours.
The power is yours.
We have a lot of tools at our disposal to help our bodies cope with strain, right? I think the number one that you said was go the fuck to sleep. If anybody has that book, it's true. Go to bed, get some rest. That's the most important thing. Let your body recover. Respect yourself enough to give your body the time it takes to recover, because then you'll be more resilient. But I think there's a couple things I wanted to make sure that we touched on, because when you talked about technology right now, we have technology that people are using to track the status of their bodies, because I think ultimately most of us want to feel better, right? We don't want to get sick. We want to live a long time. We want to live super well, and we want to feel great and be good partners, good lovers, good friends, good business people. We want to do well, and we want to be at our best. So one of the core things that you've been talking about is safety, right? And we can create states of safety in the body by meditating or deep breathing or sleeping. But I guarantee you that all of you have had times when you've laid awake at night and can't turn your brain off, or have woken up in the middle of the night stressed out, or what have you. There's some reason that you're not able to recover. Frankly, I'm just going to fully admit it. I am a terrible meditator, really, really bad. I'm good at cycling and running and swimming, but sitting there with my thoughts, not my best move, right? And so we all have our own strategies and our own tools. What kind of technologies are coming down the pike that are going to be used to be able to recreate states of safety? Because I see some of them here. There's a slow wave chair. Doc North is here, right? And people have gotten in that slow wave chair, and there's other technologies coming down the pike that help to induce safety. One of them, if you guys don't know about it, is Apollo, which was, and we're going to get there full circle, really inspired by MDMA therapy. So are you guys all familiar with the MDMA MAPS phase 3 trials for PTSD? It looks like the whole crowd.
Raise your hand if you're not familiar.
Raise your hand if you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. So this is we're gonna get connected into some interesting stuff. How many of you guys have heard of epigenetics?
Epigenetics? Epigenetics, anyone?
Inherited trauma. How many of you guys believe it's real? Okay, cool. Not everyone does. So
it is.
It is. And I want to tee you up because, so how many of you guys have heard about Apollo Neuroscience? Apollo? Okay, a lot of you. So the way Apollo works is, and it's inspired by MDMA, right? So David is an MDMA trained therapist. We were working in the lab on an AI to predict panic attack in veterans with PTSD and to be able to respond to them in real time to prevent the panic attack. And the way to do that was through low frequency sound waves that induce states of safety in the body. And so how are you inspired to create that? Because it was based on your training with Rick Doblin in the MDMA space.
So I think, there's a lot of really exciting technology coming down. And I think a lot of it involves vibration, which probably doesn't surprise that many people. Vibration in the form of sound and felt vibration that you feel through your skin. And the reason why that's interesting is because going back to safety, as a psychiatrist, I was working with people with very, very severe PTSD, most of whom were veterans, and people with sexual trauma. And it was really depressing for us, not only for them, for us, because our treatments weren't working well. And these are the treatments that we're taught to use. So these, by the book, you prescribe certain medications, people are supposed to take every day, you do therapy, but only 50% of people at best get better. And in most cases with PTSD, unfortunately, that number is like 30% long-term with the current treatments we have available that are approved. 30% of people getting better long-term. That means 70% of people diagnosed with PTSD are not getting better long-term. These are some of our single most, untreated mental illness is one of the single most expensive things to treat in our entire health system. It is devastating. to our entire society. So at that time, we were really trying to figure out, how do we help these people? How do we do a better job for these people? And what is keeping them alive, right? If our treatments suck this bad for a lot of people, what are they doing to help themselves? And what is working? What's keeping them going? These are some of the, like, veterans are interesting because they are some of the most highly trained humans on the face of the earth. And then they come back to the US and they can't reintegrate in society and work a regular day job. How does that make any sense? It's because their bodies get into such a fear state from all the things they've experienced that they literally can't calm down. So something as simple as like somebody dropping something behind you at the supermarket could literally cause a flashback that results in a hospitalization, which could cost like $30,000 from someone dropping a bottle behind you in a supermarket, right? And then you're never going back to that supermarket and your whole life gets interrupted by these things. And so what we realized from talking to these people and doing a whole bunch of research, talking to our patients with PTSD, who weren't getting better especially, is that they were always afraid. Every moment of their lives, they were afraid. And so we asked them, well, how do you feel safe? Like, what do you do that helps you feel safe? And they said, all the things I told you earlier. They hold pets, service animals, they get hugs, they spend time with their families, they make eye-to-eye contact and have empathic conversations with people they love. They come and see their therapists. They breathe. They do yoga when they can. The problem with most of these techniques, as well as they work, is that they require a ton of practice and a ton of effort. Like, to master breathwork, to be able to use it in a situation where you're really, really stressed and like completely overwhelmed, it can take like 10,000 hours of practice on breathwork to really make it useful to you in a moment of very dire need. So what we were thinking was, well, all of these things that people are doing help them feel safe. Maybe there's a common pathway, right? And then we looked at MDMA, and MDMA is like the safety drug. It makes people feel safer than anything else that we've ever experienced, especially in these MAPS trials with PTSD. And to give you an idea, people say who have had PTSD, chronic treatment-resistant PTSD, for 17.6 years on average. This is the result from the phase 2 MAPS trial. They had a 55% remission rate right after the 12 weeks, which is 3 doses of MDMA, no subsequent treatment after to follow. And 1 year out, with no additional treatment, that number from 55% went up to 67% with no additional treatment.
That doesn't happen.
Ever in mental health.
Normally what we see is that you have an impact and then people regress. Not that they continue to get better without additional intervention. So what's changed? Something has changed inside them. And I bet a lot of people here have had really transformational experiences with psychedelics. I know they have. I've been to Summit before. And so it's just true. But there's always a question. If you go back to Descartes, was that in my mind? Was that a hallucination? Was it real? Was it not real? How do I process all of that? And what the science is showing is that it is in fact real. It's not in your mind. There's a physiological change. And so we get back to the safety response, right? Inducing states of safety in the body. MDMA with therapy in the protocol, not, E at a rave is a different story. MDMA in this therapeutic setting creates a state of safety in the body. And when you see that positive slope, it means something has changed. And so, Dave, you were inspired to do some very interesting research as to whether this was actually changing people's gene expression. So you guys all told me that you're familiar with epigenetics. We all don't know we have DNA, we have a genetic code, and then we have epigenetics, how those genes are expressed. And so
like turned on and off. So it's why you don't have like teeth growing out of your skin and skin on your teeth, because our cells know to produce only skin proteins in skin and only teeth proteins in teeth. And that's all epigenetically regulated.
Your epigenes are really smart. They tell your body what to do. And when you have something happen to you, we're adaptable, right? So if we go into a situation where we, faced starvation or something really traumatic, our body's going to respond and go, you know what? I need to protect myself and I need to protect all my ancestors from this new threat so that we can adapt and continue to survive. Then this is why, if you guys are familiar with Rachel Yehuda's work, Rachel Yehuda showed that in fact these gene expression changes can change and be passed down. right? And so, for instance, people who have survived a famine, their ancestors are more likely to be obese, right? People who survived the Holocaust may be predisposed to anxiety for good reason.
And PTSD.
And PTSD. And so what's interesting is that some people, when we go back to adaptation, there's stuff that we can do. There are the somatic practices that we can use. There are the technologies that we can use to reintroduce safety into our bodies so that we can get good sleep, so we can meditate, so we can focus and feel calm at work. But there's also this work that you've done to show that it can actually, a traumatic experience could negatively change our gene expression because the famine's no longer there or the immense threat is no longer there, and therefore that is no longer a useful adaptation that MDMA therapy and other psychedelics have the opportunity to potentially reverse that maladaptive change. So I want to give you the opportunity to tell people about the study that just published.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to check it out, it was just published in Frontiers in Psychiatry as a collaboration with USC, MAPS, Yale, and Arizona State in February. And it's a 5-year-long study where we were trying to actually see what happens to safety response gene expression, like cortisol receptors, for instance, when we are experiencing MDMA-assisted therapy. Because if we really want to think about what is trauma, trauma is one or multiple intense, meaningful experiences that we have over time, after which we typically don't receive very good support. And that causes a bunch of clinical symptoms, like we call, for example, PTSD, right? And what happens when somebody with PTSD experiences MDMA-assisted therapy, where they feel, as they report, safer than I've ever felt in my life or safer than I can ever remember feeling, is that they are effectively reversing the trauma, which is an overactivated fear response, by overwhelming the body with safety so that they can remake the meaning around the thing that was scaring them in the first place, or that scared them in the first place. Does that make sense? So the reason why that's important is because in 2016, I met Rick Doblin in person for the first time at Horizons in New York City. And back then, Rick didn't really care about figuring out how psychedelics work. And he was just like, I want to show that they work. I want to get them approved. I'm really excited to get them approved. He's like, I don't give a fuck about how they work. And I was like, Rick, hold on a second. If we can figure out how psychedelics like MDMA work with this incredible study you're doing, then perhaps we might be able to recreate the effect of things like MDMA without MDMA. Like, what if we could use a technology that you could wear that could give you some of those safety feelings and those fuzzy, warm fuzzies that you get with MDMA, or from somebody giving you a hug, but without actually having to get a hug and without having to take a drug, right? And then you could take that with you on the go. And this was actually what our PTSD patients were asking for. Because even after MDMA, they're not given anything. They're just kind of sent off on their lives and they have to figure it all out. When they leave our office, they have to go figure it all out. We tell them to breathe, but when you haven't learned to breathe and learn to meditate and really train yourself, the first thing that happens when you start to learn to meditate is your mind just fills with noisy thoughts. You start to become aware of all those noisy thoughts and you're like, well, this isn't fun or pleasant.
Yeah, how many people like meditating? Okay. How many of you,
That's a good answer.
That's a great answer. How long have you been doing it? A long time?
Yeah.
Okay. When you first started doing it, was it fun? No. And so the thing is, when you're already really stressed out, all these practices, all these wellness practices are really hard to do. Like if you're underslept and really fatigued and really stressed out, it's like telling someone who's really about to freak out to calm down. You're not going to calm down.
So what we realized is by asking, this might sound ironic, and I don't mean it discouraging in any way, but by asking our patients with PTSD to learn a meditation practice is literally teeing them up for failure, because then it doesn't work, and they're like, what the fuck is wrong with me and I can't learn this? It's literally setting them up for failure. There needs to be a lot of other stuff that happens before they even get to that point. And so when we were thinking, Rachel Yehuda, who's the director, and check out her work, she's incredible. She may win a Nobel Prize. She discovered, as Kathryn said, that when we experience trauma, when we experience intense, meaningful events that we perceive as threat, one or multiple, it imprints on our epigenetic code and it changes the expression of cortisol receptors. And actually lots of other stuff, but cortisol receptors were one of the biggest ones that it changes. And that impacts the whole way that our body responds to stress. It impacts our HRV. And it's trackable over time. not just over time in our own lives, but it's trackable in our offspring's lives. So what she found out from doing this work that nobody believed, now we've replicated it many times in humans and animals, we know it's true, but what she found that's such a landmark discovery is that if we experience trauma and we don't, and that's going to imprint on our epigenetic code, just for an example, change our cortisol receptor gene expression to not function as well. When that happens, if we don't process and fix that trauma, we pass on that cortisol receptor change to our offspring. And then our offspring passes on to their offspring. And in animals who live in actually safe environments, that can last 4 generations. In humans, we could pass stuff on for 10, 12, 14 generations if we don't realize. If we don't do anything about it, if we don't do our own work, we will pass it on, right? Which is really cool when you think about it, because that means we can stop the cycle. The power is literally within us, each of us, in any moment to stop the cycle by doing our own work and taking care of ourselves. And taking care of ourselves means feeling safe enough to heal and creating space for ourselves to feel safe enough to heal. And so we were trying to figure out, what are the markers of safety? How do we track it? What happens? And so Rick, I was able to convince Rick with this story that this was interesting enough to investigate. He got
Bless you.
Me and myself and 3 of my psychiatry colleagues trained in MDMA-assisted therapy. We kicked off a study with Rachel to see if trauma, these intense, negative, meaningful experiences that are perceived as threatening, cause negative epigenetic changes that predisposition our offspring to PTSD and depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses, and probably physical ones too, then MDMA-assisted therapy, which clinically looks like a reverse trauma, 67% people at 1 year out are no longer symptomatic, and that's better than right after the treatment with nothing else. So that means they're learning how to heal themselves by feeling safe enough to heal. We're teaching them how to heal themselves. And so we thought, well, that should reverse those cortisol receptor changes. And that's what we just published in February, which we showed, in fact, from sampling all of them, as many of the MAPS patients as we could get to share their spit with us before and after they took MDMA, that we showed without a doubt that MDMA reverses trauma on the level of epigenetic code. And there's one more interesting thing that came out of that paper that's really wild, and something that we did not necessarily expect, because it was small. It was a relatively small sample, and what we saw is not only statistical significance in MDMA reversing these trauma markers, but the amount of trauma marker reversal correlated directly with how much better people got. So the better you get, or the more epigenetic modification you have, they're matched, right? Or at least they look like they're matched. And we're going to see it as we get more samples. We're going to see that that's actually really matched, but they're trending in the same direction. And so what that means is that we now have biomarkers that we can track the impact of trauma on the body, and what's going to happen in probably 5 to 10 years is you're going to walk into your psychiatrist's office or your doctor's office, you're going to check off all the boxes for depression if you're not feeling good, and then the doctor's going to take a saliva or a blood sample, they're going to run your epigenetic code, and they're going to say, well, you're going to need 42 hours of psychotherapy and 10 doses of ketamine to get to remission from this illness. That is where the field is going because of this work that we're doing. And that is going to be when we cure mental illness. And it's going to happen. It's not an if, it is going to happen. And I think just the last thing that came from that, just to tie it full circle to Apollo, is that when we saw MDMA working with people and we saw how powerfully it was amplifying the safety circuitry in our brains, we had to ask the question, is there another way to get there, right? And so I mapped out, when I was working at the University of Pittsburgh, I mapped out the entire nervous system in terms of breath work, meditation, yoga, movement, all the things I was mentioning earlier, soothing touch, soothing music, what is actually happening in our brains and bodies when we experience those really nice, soothing feelings. And it turns out the same basic thing is happening as when we take MDMA. It's just there's no molecules being introduced from the outside.
In fact, we show that when you increase someone's heart rate variability, that also correlates with improved outcomes, whether that's cognitive performance, ability to meditate, ability to get to sleep, that there's a correlation between how much your body recovers and the other outcomes. And so it's really interesting Because when you're inducing states of safety in the body, whether that's through a macro dose of MDMA with therapy, or whether that's inducing states of safety in the body through somatic practice, you are retraining your nervous system. You are retraining your nervous system to be calm. And one of the biometrics that we can use to measure through any wearable that we have is heart rate variability. But it's going to be really interesting to see, in fact, what's happening in terms of what we're doing to our own epigenetic markers by giving ourselves the respect to treat ourselves nicely, to treat ourselves like we treat our friends, and to take care of ourselves. So the power is yours.
and we really wanted to make that power accessible to people. We wanted everybody to be able to experience that. And what we realized is that the single fastest way, when you look at all the neural pathways I just mentioned, the touch pathway, the breathing pathway, the music listening pathway, the single fastest pathway to safety, as it turns out, that goes back hundreds of millions of years to ancient mammals, is touch. Every single mammal that gives birth, almost every single one from that I know of, nurses their young when they're born. As soon as that newborn pops out of the womb, that newborn needs comfort instantly. It was in a completely safe environment, no longer safe. Foreign world has to breathe on its own, doesn't know what the hell is going on, right? What happens? Mother holds baby. Baby calms down, right? It's not just a human thing. It's like an all mammal thing. And that is a hardwired safety pathway that has existed for hundreds of millions of years in animals. So what we realized is that you can tap into that pathway, and that's why hugs feel so good, by the way. That's why hand-holding feels so good, because it's an instant reminder that we're safe in the moment. It literally acts instantaneously. And so we thought, well, if MDMA does this, if touch does this, what if we could tap into the touch pathway and give people something like vibration in a wearable that could start to nudge the body into a state of calm and help us remember to breathe and help us remember to be present and that we are actually safe. And so Apollo was a technology that came out of our work at the University of Pittsburgh that I actually was heavily inspired by the MDMA pathway that we were learning about, and to replicate the safety benefits of MDMA for our patients with PTSD on the go. And then we made a bunch of prototypes, like, I don't know, tested them on 3,000 people between 2018 and 2020, and we were some of those people, and we tested them on our friends and family. And, working in the ER late nights is really hard. And when you have a little soothing device on you that's reminding you that you're, like I don't personally identify, like when somebody asks me, like, are you safe? I would say, yeah, of course I'm safe. But when I'm in the ER, especially in the psychiatric ER, and I'm on the end, like the tail end of like a 14-hour shift, you better believe like my body is really tired and it feels unsafe, even if cognitively I know that I'm safe. And so we started using these prototypes in the ER and like passing them out to all the doctors, and we realized that we loved feeling this because it felt so good. It helped us focus. It helped us stay calm. And so then that technology has now disseminated into first responder and healthcare communities. That's what's called Apollo Neuro. If you haven't tried it, just come find us, check it out. But it's in healthcare communities for healthcare workers with burnout. And it's the very, very first tool, any tool, but that's not music. That's a wearable tool that's like your psychedelic sidekick. So we have it's the first tool that's ever received a patent to reduce unpleasant experiences in psychedelic states and to restore agency in any medicine-assisted therapy, from ketamine to chemotherapy and MDMA. And it's being currently tested in the MAPS, with MAPS in collaboration for integration after MDMA-assisted therapy and in ketamine clinics around the country.
Yeah, I wanna take it full circle. So, a couple things. The power is yours. Go to sleep. Touch is good. Touch is our fastest pathway to safety, right? And Apollo, which is a technology that was inspired by the mechanism of MDMA, which is to induce states of the safety, has been published trials demonstrating that's the only technology to improve your heart rate variability, and it gives you more sleep. And so all of these mechanisms are the same, which is helping your body to recover, helps you to deal with strain. And it's the only technology, as you mentioned, in the MAPS MDMA trial, and is full circle actually being used to make trips safer, because it can help you feel safer during psychedelic states. So safety and take care of yourselves. That's the main mission of how you want to adapt and change and be resilient to the world, is take care of yourself and take care of your friends, and self-love. It's important. And I know we have been talking for quite a while, so I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions before we wrap up. So,
can I add one thing before?
Of course you can.
The very last super quick thing is that, just again tying it back to the epigenetics and safety and vibration. What's really interesting from our PTSD trials that are ongoing with Apollo, which delivers sound wave vibrations to the body, just like similar to the Doc North chair, but in the background, like you barely notice them. And those very gentle sound wave vibrations, as Kathryn said, increase HRV, they increase feelings of safety in the body. And we've done PTSD trials, and we've done ADHD trials, and many other trials. And what's really interesting is this was based on how MDMA works. Guess what? It gets similar results. People who use this kind of technology and do these soothing practices, but specifically that use Apollo, we're seeing very, very similar results with PTSD patients than we're seeing in the MDMA trial. Not the same by any means, but very similar. So the Denver VA, and I don't know if any of you have worked at the VA, but they don't usually fund studies of other people's stuff. And they're very hard to do studies with because they have a very tight ecosystem. But great if you can do anything. And they treat most of the PTSD patients in the US. And so for all the veterans, of course. And so the Denver VA is currently doing a study that's replicating something similar to the MAPS trial with MDMA, where we showed that MDMA is reversing these trauma markings on epigenetic code. We're doing the same study without MDMA, with just Apollo, to see if we were right. Could we actually induce some of the same remodeling of epigenetic changes that MDMA is inducing that seems to result in healing from PTSD? If we can make the body feel safe through regular touch, which most of us don't have enough of on a regular basis, will that look the same and cause the same epigenetic outcomes? And that study is about 60% done, and it should be wrapping up in 24. But it's really exciting because we're actually able to get to a point technologically where we start to fulfill the promise of massively disseminating healing tools to the community. MDMA is a great tool. It is not going to be available to everyone who needs it for probably 5 to 10 years. It costs $14,000 to deliver one course of MDMA treatment. It's going to take some time. So we need more tools. And we created Apollo as just the first example of a tool that can help show people that this is possible.
And that's why it's so important to understand how stuff works, because then you can replicate it. So do we have questions? Yeah?
There's one here. Start. You want to go first? Okay.
Hi, my name is Richard, and I just wanted to do a brief. So in 2018, I had brain surgery, and I was a victim of medical malpractice. So I was in a coma for 10 days. Wow. I could not walk, talk, eat, or speak for 4 months. For 3 of those months, I had ketamine therapy every night. I truly believe that saved my life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know we only have a little bit of time, so I just want to encourage everybody to ask.
Hi. Other than the epigenome, for the host genome, the personal genome, can you speak a bit about predisposition to mental illness and also difficulty in responding? So the variability in responses due to personal genetics, and how do you compensate for that or account for that in your important work?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing is we have to make sure we're using the right words to describe what we're talking about. So you said genetic, but it's not genetic. 99.9% of mental illness is not considered genetic.
I've discovered 16 types.
Of
monogenic.
Oh yeah, no, there are definitely genetic mental illnesses, but they're very rare. Almost all mental illness that we see is epigenetic. Epigenetic means that it's modifiable. Genetics are not modifiable naturally. Genetics are the same in every cell in your entire body, hopefully, unless you've experienced a huge amount of like environmental stress or toxin exposure or too much sunlight and things like that, you burn your skin. Too much of that will cause genetic mutations that will cause things like cancer. But in general, our DNA is the same in almost every cell of our bodies, and it's the same when we die as when we're born, if we're lucky. But the epigenetic layer is what's changing. And that's the interface that explains the interaction between the environment and what we were brought into this world with from our families. So it's really about the interface of the two. So we don't have enough data yet in general to look at your epigenetic layer and understand what your predispositions are, but we all have predispositions. And some of those are genetic predispositions, like they're in our DNA, but most of them are epigenetic predispositions. And what a predisposition means is that we're at an increased likelihood of developing X, something. That could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing, but we're at an increased likelihood of developing X. In general, it's very rare that it's a guarantee. A predisposition does not mean you're going to get it. It means if you do not take care of yourself or you expose yourself to too much stress or what have you, then you're at an increased likelihood of getting X. So the way we explain that to people is that you were brought into the world with certain things. Let's understand what those things are the best we can, most of which we can talk out, and we can understand somebody's background, how they were brought up, etc. You can do some epigenetic testing, but then again, the testing is it's not fully, we don't understand how to analyze it all yet. We can do as much testing as we want, but we don't have like the full ability to analyze it yet because we just haven't done enough studies. And not just us, but the field as a whole. So we really work with what we can change. And what we can change is the way you think about yourself, the way you understand yourself and your trauma and how you see the world. And that's based on, generally speaking, how well you were supported after you faced challenge growing up. And that is modifiable. So like that is the good stuff. Because if you can't change genetics. So if you figure out what you can change, then all of a sudden you can start to really turn things around for people. But if you don't know what you can change, or you are trying to act on a system that can't change, then it winds up being a lot harder of a process. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Actually, if you have time. Yeah. Great talk. Fantastic. And you've actually justified our 10 years party.
Set and setting.
But I wanted to ask, actually, I heard something around like MDMA, when you use it actually like does something to your serotonin where you kind of have to like get it back or something. Can you bring it closer? Oh, sorry. I heard like MDMA, when you use it, like does something to your serotonin, right? And that it takes a while for it to come back. Have you seen anything like that in some of the experiments around?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's a very common misconception is that MDMA works by creating, the way MDMA works molecularly is you take it and then induce a rapid burst of a bunch of neurotransmitters. Serotonin is one of them. Other psychedelics don't work in quite the same way. MDMA is an amphetamine molecule. So it works like an amphetamine, induce a burst of neurotransmitter. What happens when you create a burst of neurotransmitter in the brain is that the receptors get overwhelmed. So if you imagine our neurons talk to each other like this is neurons that are releasing serotonin, this is the one that's receiving serotonin, okay? So if I take normally it's just sending serotonin, there's a balance, there's receptors over here, there's serotonin coming out of here, and the neurons are talking to each other, and that's how messaging occurs. If I was to take a bunch of MDMA, this cell would release a huge burst of serotonin and other things over a very short time. What happens to this cell says, holy shit, that's a lot of serotonin, right? So in one day, generally speaking, the receptors on this side, the receiving end, don't really change that much. But if you keep that bursting that over and over and over again, this receiving cell says, that is too much for me. I am overstimulated. I'm turning my receptors off. And then the receptors actually get pulled back into the receiving cell because the receiving cell's like, there is way more serotonin than I can handle. Just serotonin being one example. There's way more than I can handle. So I'm withdrawing the ability to receive serotonin. And then when you stop taking the MDMA, you stop taking the medicine that's inducing that burst, you go back to normal levels of serotonin, but you don't have enough receptors to receive it. And so you're not getting enough activation, so you get underactivation. And so it can take, it's not, again, it's reversible though. I still would not recommend doing MDMA more than once every 2 to 4 weeks. Like MDMA is one of those medicines that you just shouldn't do more than once every 2 to 4 weeks. That's an absolute max. And then if you do it once every 2 to 4 weeks, especially we recommend doing it with somebody, in a trained, a good environment, you need to give yourself breaks in between. In the MAPS trial, it's 3 doses. Each one's 2 weeks apart over a 12-week period, and then that's it. And sometimes it's a year break for people before they end up doing it again. And so, or several months. With ketamine, it's different. Ketamine, you don't build tolerance as quickly. It works in a different way. It has a much what we call dirtier mechanism that acts on multiple different receptor sites. So we can use ketamine every 3 days for depression treatment for psychedelic
And all of these
purposes.
usages are for people in treatment.
Yeah, I'm giving you the treatment recommendations, mainly because that's the only thing
We're
we
not
actually...
recommending that you do it all the time.
Yeah, this is what we have evidence
brains
for.
alone.
So this is just what we have evidence for. So for depression, the trials have shown you can treat somebody with ketamine once every 3 days for 6 to 12 doses, and you can get people to like 50% of people with treatment-resistant depression will enter remission, which is very, very good. But that's a different pattern of use than what we're talking about with MDMA. MDMA is a much more sensitive compound, and it's more delicate, and we have to be more careful with it because it's an amphetamine psychedelic. It's not a classical tryptamine psychedelic. Does that answer your question? Cool.
I think we're probably at time. I know there's some questions. Come find us. We're happy to answer them. But I want to thank everybody for hanging out in this super warm environment. I am very hot up here. I'm sure you're very hot down there. So it was a great audience. And I thank you guys for sticking with us. And I want to thank Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please come find us. We love to chat. Happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you again.